setting sail into the Golden Age. So, picture this. The year is somewhere around the late 1600s. The seas are wide open, the world is buzzing with new trade routes, and Europe's big powers are basically playing an endless game of risk. Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands are all scrambling to grab as many overseas colonies as possible, and ships are hauling treasures back and forth across the Atlantic like a conveyor belt. Gold, silver, sugar, spices, you name it. And where there are treasure ships, there are people looking to liberate that treasure. Enter the pirates. Now, when people hear pirates, the first thing that usually comes to mind is Hollywood. You know, parrots on shoulders, matey accents, wooden legs, treasure maps with a big red X, and walking the plank. The kind of stuff Disney has made billions off of. But let me spoil the ending right at the start. Most of that, yeah, it's fake. Don't get me wrong, pirates were wild, colorful, and terrifying characters. But they weren't wandering around saying "shiver me timbers" every 5 minutes. They were desperate sailors, runaway criminals, ex-Navy men, and sometimes just plain unlucky folks who found themselves in a cutthroat world where stealing on the open seas seemed like a better life choice than starving in some port town. The period we call the Golden Age of piracy wasn't golden for pirates in the sense that they were living in luxury. It's just what historians use to describe that short but dramatic stretch of time, roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, when piracy absolutely exploded. Think of it as the rock star era of being a sea criminal. Before that, pirates existed, sure, but after this age, governments cracked down so hard that piracy was never quite the same. This was the time of the legends, the blackbirds, and the calico jacks, the stories that fueled novels, plays, and eventually movies. But before we go full throttle into sword fights and cannon blasts, let's step back a bit. Why did piracy even boom in the first place? Because for a golden age to happen, you need the right ingredients. And boy, did the 17th and early 18th centuries provide them. First ingredient: empire building on world. Europe was basically exporting its chaos overseas. Spain was shipping literal boatloads of silver and gold from the mines of South America. England was planting colonies all over the Caribbean. France had sugar islands. The Dutch had trade hubs. And every one of these nations wanted to undercut the other, which meant ships stuffed with riches were constantly floating across the ocean, often lightly guarded. That's basically leaving your wallet sitting on the sidewalk and expecting no one to touch it. Second ingredient: sailors were miserable. If you worked on a merchant ship or in a navy, life sucked. You were underpaid, half-starved, and constantly bossed around by some officer who probably hated his job as much as you did. If you got sick, too bad. If you lost a limb, too bad. If you complained, you might get whipped. For a lot of sailors, piracy wasn't just about greed, it was about freedom. Sure, life on a pirate ship was dangerous, but at least you got a say in where you went and what you did. You could even vote. Imagine that, voting rights on a pirate ship when most common folks on land had no such thing. Third ingredient: chaos in the colonies. Governments were far away, communication was slow, and many colonial governors were corrupt or just desperate to keep their towns alive, which meant if pirates rolled into port with some gold to spend and a few barrels of rum to trade, locals often looked the other way. Pirates boosted the economy in their own crooked way. It was kind of like your town suddenly hosting a bunch of rowdy tourists who spend a lot of money but also break a lot of furniture. So, all these ingredients came together, and out of the oven popped the golden age of piracy. It wasn't just in the Caribbean, though that's where the most famous stories come from. Pirates prowled the American coastlines, raided African trade hubs, and even ventured into the Indian Ocean. But the Caribbean was like the beating heart of it all. Small islands, rich shipping lanes, and 1,000 places to hide made it the ultimate pirate playground. Now, here is something worth noting. Pirates weren't always the villains, at least, not to everyone. When they attacked Spanish treasure ships, the English or the French would secretly cheer them on. Sometimes, these pirates were even given licenses to attack enemy ships, They were called privateers, a fancy way of saying government-approved pirate. One day you're a patriotic hero. The next day the war ends, and you're suddenly just a criminal. That blurred line between privateer and pirate is a big part of why this whole era feels so chaotic. And chaotic it was. This wasn't just a handful of outlaws on one or two ships. At its height, piracy in the Caribbean alone had hundreds, maybe even thousands of men, and a few women sailing under the black flag. Some were brutal, violent, and feared across the seas. Others were more like mischievous rebels, living fast and free until they inevitably got caught. What tied them all together was that, for a brief moment in history, they carved out a space where ordinary sailors could flip the bird at kings and empires and live life on their own terms. Of course, the golden age didn't last forever. Governments eventually got their act together. Navies started patrolling more aggressively, and those pirate havens that once welcomed them became dangerous traps. By the early 1700s, the noose was tightening, but we'll get to the fall later. For now, we're just setting the stage. Think of this as the opening credits of the movie. The seas are restless, the ships are loaded with treasure, and a new breed of outlaw is about to take center stage. So, grab your hammock, pour yourself some imaginary rum or tea if you're being sensible, and settle in, because the golden age of piracy wasn't just about plunder and violence, it was about adventure, rebellion, and the human craving for freedom in a world that often gave people none. And in the next chapter, we'll dig into the real why. Why exactly did piracy go from a nuisance to a full-blown epidemic on the high seas? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just because pirates like shiny things. Why piracy boomed? If you've ever wondered why the golden age of piracy exploded when it did, the answer isn't just because pirates loved gold. That part is true, sure, but there was a perfect storm of events, politics, and bad decisions that created the pirate playground of the late 1600s and early 1700s. Imagine a cake recipe. You don't just need sugar, you need flour, eggs, butter, and someone reckless enough to shove the whole thing into the oven without reading the instructions. Piracy was kind of like that. So, let's break down the ingredients. Ingredient 1. Europe couldn't stop expanding by the 1600s. The big European powers were all elbowing each other for colonies overseas. Spain had gotten the early lead, hauling mountains of silver and gold out of the Americas. Ships loaded with treasure sailed homeward like floating piggy banks, just begging to be cracked open. England, France, and the Netherlands were jealous and wanted in on the action. This meant the seas were buzzing with merchant vessels, cargo ships, and naval convoys. In other words, a buffet for anyone brave enough or desperate enough to take a bite. Ingredient 2. Endless wars. Here is the thing about Europe: back then they could not stop fighting. The Spanish fought the English, the French fought the Dutch, sometimes everyone fought everyone. And while kings and queens played chess with soldiers on land, the oceans turned into free-for-all brawling pits. Governments handed out letters of marque to privateers, which basically said, hey, you can attack enemy ships, and we'll pretend it's legal. These privateers were, in plain English, pirates with a hall pass. But wars always end, and when peace treaties were signed, thousands of sailors who had spent years raiding enemy ships suddenly found themselves out of work. Their hall passes expired overnight. Do you think all those men politely went home to farm turnips? Nope. A lot of them just kept doing what they were already doing. Congratulations, privateers, you're now pirates. Ingredient 3. Miserable sailors' life on a legitimate ship was awful. You were paid poorly if you got paid at all. Captains were often tyrants. Food was moldy. Water went stale. Disease was everywhere. And punishments were brutal. Sailors could be whipped, chained, or worse. So when word spread that pirates divided loot equally, let their crews vote on decisions, and even offered compensation if you lost a limb in battle, well, piracy suddenly didn't sound so bad. Sure, you could die in a sword fight, but at least you weren't starving while someone called you worthless on a Royal Navy ship. Ingredient 4. Weak law and order in the colonies. Europe might have had big fancy navies, but the colonies were far away. Governors were underfunded, communication was slow, and half the time they were corrupt. Pirates could stroll into a port, flash some gold or rum, and suddenly everyone was their best friend. Tavern owners, merchants, even governors sometimes turned a blind eye because pirates spent money like it was going out of style. In fact, whole towns thrived on pirate cash. Nassau in the Bahamas basically turned into a pirate republic because the locals realized pirates were good for business. Ingredient 5. Geography was on their side. The Caribbean, especially, was a pirate's dream. Dozens of islands, hidden coves, shallow waters where big naval ships couldn't follow. It was the ultimate game of hide and seek. A pirate sloop could dart in, raid a merchant ship, and vanish into the island maze before anyone knew what happened. The same was true off the coast of Africa and even in the Indian Ocean. Global trade was booming, but the oceans were just too big for governments to patrol properly. Ingredient 6. Trade equals treasure everywhere. Think about what was sailing across the seas during this time. Spanish galleons stuffed with silver, English ships carrying sugar, tobacco, and rum, Dutch ships loaded with spices and fabrics. Every cargo was valuable, and the oceans were like highways with 0 police officers. To a pirate, this wasn't just opportunity, it was temptation. You could literally see floating by on the horizon. The snowball effect. Once piracy got rolling, it kind of fed itself. Successful raids inspired more sailors to join in. Pirate crews could grow overnight. A single daring capture, say, seizing a treasure ship, could turn a ragtag bunch of nobodies into legends. Stories of rich loot spread like wildfire, attracting even more desperate men. And before long, piracy wasn't just a nuisance, it was an epidemic. The human factor. But here is the funny part. Pirates weren't necessarily in it for lifelong careers. Many of them didn't expect to live long enough to retire anyway. They just wanted fast money, fast fun, and maybe to thumb their noses at the kings and captains who had made their lives miserable. This wasn't just about greed, it was rebellion. A way of saying, you treated us like dirt, so now we're going to take what we deserve. And honestly, for a while, it worked. Empires were stretched thin, trade was booming, and the pirates had all the motivation in the world. You couldn't have scripted a better setup for chaos on the high seas. Wrapping it up, so why did piracy boom? Because everything lined up perfectly. Endless wars created skilled raiders. Peace left them unemployed. Merchant ships carried mountains of wealth. Sailors were sick of being abused. Colonies turned a blind eye, and the geography of the seas made it all possible. It was the perfect recipe. And once the first wave of buccaneers showed how profitable piracy could be, the floodgates opened. In the next chapter, we'll zoom in on the everyday sailors before they became pirates. Because before they were outlaws flying the black flag, they were just regular guys stuck scrubbing decks, eating wormy biscuits, and wondering if there was more to life than swabbing floors for a captain who barely knew their name. Spoiler, there was. Life at sea before piracy. Before the golden age turned sailors into fearsome pirates with cool nicknames. They were just regular sea workers. And spoiler, their lives weren't glamorous. If you ever romanticized sailing the open ocean in the 1600s, let me stop you right there. Life at sea was basically a non-stop combo of bad food, bad pay, and bad smells. Imagine being stuck in a floating wooden box with 200 other sweaty people for months on end. That was the reality. The paycheck that barely existed. Most sailors worked on either merchant ships or naval ships. Both sounded respectable, but respectable doesn't mean comfortable. Pay was laughably low, and even worse, it was often delayed or stolen by corrupt officers. You might work 6 months and then get told, "Oops, sorry, no money this time." And if you did get paid, it wasn't enough to feed your family for long. A lot of sailors basically lived paycheck to paycheck, except the paycheck might not show up at all. Pirates, on the other hand, offered a wild deal. You get a fair share of whatever loot the crew takes. No middlemen skimming off the top. No captains harding it all. Compared to being cheated by a navy or a merchant company, piracy was the lesser evil. The food, if you could call it, that what did sailors eat? Mostly hardtack biscuits. And if you're wondering what that is, imagine a cracker that's been left in a drawer for 3 years and is harder than a brick. You didn't bite into hardtack, you gnawed on it like a dog with a bone. Sometimes you had to dunk it in water just to soften it enough to chew. And surprise, many of those biscuits were full of weevils, tiny insects that had made themselves at home. Sailors usually just ate the bugs along with the bread. Extra protein, I guess. Besides that, they got salted meat that could be so tough and rotten it made your stomach hurt. Fresh food, rare. Vegetables, forget it. Which is why scurvy, the disease caused by lack of vitamin C, was rampant. Teeth fell out, gums bled, and bodies weakened. All because no one thought, maybe we should bring oranges. The workload, if you were a sailor, you worked all the time. Climbing masts in storms, pulling heavy ropes, scrubbing decks, repairing sails, basically endless chores. There was no such thing as a weekend or a vacation. Even when you weren't on duty, you were probably wet, cold, or trying to sleep on a wooden plank while rats scurried over you. And safety, non-existent. Fall overboard. And that was it. Ships weren't turning around for one guy. Lose a finger in the rigging. Too bad. Get sick. Hope you don't die, because the doctor on board might just cut something off and call it a day. Discipline and punishments, captains and officers ruled with iron fists. Disobedience, or even just bad luck, could mean brutal punishments. The most famous was flogging, being whipped with a cat-o'-nine tails, which was basically 9 ropes tied together with knots that tore into your skin. Some sailors were keel-hauled, dragged under the ship's barnacle-covered hull until they were shredded. Others got tossed in the brig or had their rations cut. So yeah, fun wasn't exactly the word most sailors used to describe their jobs. The boredom, ironically, for all the hard work, sailors were also often bored out of their minds. Crossing the Atlantic could take months, and there were long stretches when nothing happened. No land, no storms, no action, just endless water. To pass the time, sailors sang sea shanties, gambled, or told tall tales. Some carved little trinkets out of wood or bone. But most of the time, they just endured. Why this created pirates so? Imagine you're one of these guys. You're broke, hungry, overworked, underappreciated, and constantly yelled at by a captain who thinks he's better than you. Then along comes a pirate crew offering better food, equal say in decisions, and a bigger share of the rewards. Sure, it's illegal. Sure, you might die in a sword fight. But compared to your current life, piracy suddenly looks like an upgrade. In fact, a lot of pirates were former navy or merchant sailors who just jumped ship, sometimes literally, because they'd had enough. For them, piracy wasn't just about greed. It was about dignity, freedom, and not being whipped every other week. The turning point, the thing is, not every sailor who suffered became a pirate. Some stuck it out, hoping for promotions or simply too scared of the noose. But enough of them said, forget this, and joined the Black Flag. That's what fueled the Golden Age, this steady stream of angry, skilled sailors who'd rather risk death than keep scrubbing decks for nothing. Wrapping it up, so before we imagine pirates as glamorous outlaws, remember where they came from. They weren't born with cutlasses in their hands or parrots on their shoulders. They were regular guys who got sick of eating wormy crackers and being treated like garbage. When you think about it, piracy was less about chasing treasure and more about running away from misery. And in the next chapter, we'll meet the early wave of sea rebels who really kicked this whole pirate thing into gear, the buccaneers. Hunters turned raiders who showed the world that the seas could belong to outlaws too. The buccaneers, before pirates became the rock stars of the seas, there were the buccaneers. These guys were the warm-up act, the opening band before the main show of the golden age of piracy. And like most good stories, their beginning was a little strange. They didn't start as sea raiders at all. They started as hunters. Yeah, hunters, not sailors. From hunters to sea raiders back in the early 1600s, the island of Hispaniola, today split between Haiti and the Dominican Republic had a lot of wild pigs and cattle running around. These animals were the descendants of livestock that the Spanish had brought over, but then abandoned. French and English settlers, kind of misfits themselves, moved in and began hunting the animals. They cooked the meat over open fires on wooden frames called boucans. That's where the word buccaneer comes from. Basically, it meant barbecue guy. So, the first buccaneers weren't scary pirates. They were grill masters. Picture a bunch of scruffy dudes smoking meat all day and selling it to passing ships. That was their hustle. Trouble with the Spanish, but the Spanish, who claimed Hispaniola and most of the Caribbean, didn't like these outsiders setting up shop. They sent soldiers to drive the hunters out. The buccaneers scattered, many of them ending up on the smaller island of Tortuga, just off the coast of Hispaniola. And it was here that the story takes a turn. Stranded, angry, and broke, the buccaneers realized they had another skill. They knew the coasts, they knew how to shoot, and they had boats. So why not raid Spanish ships instead of pigs? And just like that, hunters became sea raiders. The rise of the buccaneers. By the mid-1600s, buccaneers were terrorizing the Caribbean. They weren't full-blown pirates yet, they were more like freelance mercenaries. Sometimes they got hired by colonial governors who wanted to weaken Spain. Other times, they just did their own thing. They attacked Spanish ships, raided coastal towns, and built a reputation as fearless, ruthless fighters. What made them dangerous was their adaptability. Buccaneers were excellent marksmen, remember. They'd been hunters. They could snipe sailors from a distance or storm a ship with terrifying accuracy. Plus, they had nothing to lose. Most of them had been outcasts anyway. Port Royal, Sin City of the Caribbean, one of the most famous buccaneer hangouts was Port Royal, Jamaica. Imagine Las Vegas, but with more rum and fewer neon lights. After the English took Jamaica from Spain in 1655, Port Royal became a booming port where buccaneers gathered between raids. The place was overflowing with taverns, gambling houses, and brothels. Sailors said there were more bars per square mile there than anywhere else on earth. And when buccaneers came back with loot, they blew it all in a matter of days. Port Royal had a reputation as the wickedest city in the world. And honestly, it probably earned that title. Henry Morgan, the superstar buccaneer. If there was one buccaneer who stood out, it was Henry Morgan. He started as just another raider, but climbed the ranks to lead huge expeditions. His most famous feat was the sack of Panama in 1671, where his men marched across the isthmus and captured the city in brutal fashion. Morgan made a fortune, and instead of getting punished, he got rewarded. England actually knighted him and made him the governor of Jamaica. Imagine that one day you're burning cities. The next day you're Sir Henry Morgan in charge of keeping order. Morgan's story shows how blurry the line was between pirate, buccaneer, and hero. If you raided Spain, England loved you. If you raided England, you were suddenly a villain. The buccaneer lifestyle. So, what was life like for these guys? Rough, but free. They formed bands that operated like little militaries, with leaders chosen based on skill. Loot was divided fairly, and discipline was strict when needed. But they weren't bound by the rigid class systems of Europe. A runaway servant, a poor farmer, or even an escaped slave could join their ranks and rise based on merit. That kind of freedom was rare in the 1600s. They lived for the moment, spending their shares of plunder as fast as they got it. Drinking binges, wild parties, reckless spending, it was all part of the deal. For most buccaneers, there was no retirement plan. The end of the buccaneers by the late 1600s, though, the age of the buccaneers started to fade. European powers began signing peace treaties, and suddenly governors couldn't openly support raiders anymore. Some buccaneers settled down, others became full-fledged pirates, and some like Morgan traded the black flag for official titles. But their legacy was huge. They paved the way for the pirates of the Golden Age. They proved that ragtag groups of outcasts could take on mighty Spain and win. They showed that the Caribbean was the perfect place for outlaws to thrive, and they inspired the next generation to push piracy to its full glory. Wrapping it up so, the buccaneers started as pig hunters, got kicked around by the Spanish, reinvented themselves as raiders, and set the stage for piracy as we imagine it today. They were the bridge between random sea bandits and the organized pirate crews that followed. Without them, there might never have been a golden age of piracy at all. In the next chapter, we'll zoom in on the Caribbean itself, the ultimate pirate playground, because it wasn't just the pirates who made the golden age happen. The geography, the trade routes, and the tiny islands full of taverns and shady governors played just as big a role. Pirates in the Caribbean. If the golden age of piracy had a stage, it was the Caribbean. Warm waters, hundreds of islands, and trade routes stuffed with riches made it the ultimate pirate playground. When you picture pirates lounging in hammocks with rum, attacking treasure ships, or hiding out in some tropical cove, odds are you're picturing the Caribbean. But what made this region so perfect for piracy? Let's break it down. The treasure highway. First things first. The Spanish treasure fleets. Spain's empire in the Americas was ridiculously rich. Silver poured out of mines in Peru and Mexico. Gold came from Colombia. And emeralds sparkled their way onto ships. All of it was loaded onto convoys of galleons that sailed from the New World back to Spain. These fleets had to stop in the Caribbean places, like Havana, to regroup before crossing the Atlantic. To a pirate, this was like watching armored trucks roll into a parking lot and sit there for a few days. The temptation was irresistible. Even when ships weren't hauling treasure, they carried sugar, tobacco, indigo, and other valuable goods. In short, every ship was a prize. A maze of islands. The Caribbean wasn't just one or two big islands. It was a web of hundreds of islands, cays, and hidden inlets. Big naval warships had trouble navigating shallow waters, but pirate sloops could slip through with ease. That meant pirates had endless hideouts, secret anchorages, and escape routes. You could raid a ship one day and vanish into mangroves the next. It was basically nature's gift to outlaws. Weak colonial control on paper. The Caribbean belonged to mighty empire Spain, England, France, the Netherlands. In reality, control was patchy at best. Governors were often underfunded, understaffed, or simply corrupt. Many were happy to look the other way when pirates showed up with stolen loot, as long as the pirates spent money in town. Some ports even thrived on piracy. Nassau in the Bahamas, Port Royal in Jamaica, and Tortuga off Hispaniola became legendary pirate havens. These towns offered rum, women, repairs, supplies, and, most importantly, safety from the long arm of European law. As long as pirates kept the gold flowing, local merchants and tavern owners were all smiles. The smuggling game. It wasn't just pirates causing trouble. Smugglers were everywhere, sneaking goods between colonies to dodge taxes or trade restrictions. Pirates and smugglers often worked hand in hand, creating a shadow economy that rivaled the official one. In some places, pirate loot was just part of everyday life. Your neighbor might have a silver candlestick liberated from a Spanish galleon, and nobody asked too many questions. The Pirate Republic, the Caribbean, even saw something remarkable. Pirates creating their own sort of republic. The best example was Nassau in the Bahamas. By the early 1700s, it was practically run by pirates. They set up their own rules, welcomed new recruits, and turned the place into a headquarters for raiding the surrounding seas. For a brief time, Nassau wasn't just a town, it was the capital of piracy. This pirate republic terrified the colonial powers. It showed that pirates weren't just scattered bands of criminals. They could unite, build communities, and challenge the empires themselves. Everyday Caribbean chaos. It's worth remembering that the Caribbean wasn't just about pirates and treasure fleets. It was also home to plantation economies, enslaved Africans, and constant wars between empires. Life was harsh for most people, but pirates thrived in the chaos. They exploited rivalries, struck at weak points, and sometimes even worked as unofficial allies for colonial powers when it suited them. Why the Caribbean stole the show? Pirates did operate in other parts of the world, the African coast, the Indian Ocean, even as far as the Red Sea. But the Caribbean is where piracy became legendary. The combination of geography, wealth, weak defenses, and corrupt officials made it unbeatable. Plus, the image of palm trees, sandy beaches, and turquoise waters just feels right. It's no wonder stories, books, and movies have cemented the Caribbean as the ultimate pirate setting. Wrapping it up so, if you want to know why the golden age of piracy is so tied to the Caribbean, it's simple. The riches flowed through here. The geography protected pirates, and the locals often welcomed them. It was a perfect storm, and in the next chapter, we'll zoom in even closer not just on the region, but on the actual pirate towns themselves. Because while the Caribbean was the stage, places like Tortuga, Port Royal, and Nassau were the pirate VIP lounges, full of rum, chaos, and more than a few broken laws. Famous pirate havens. If pirates were the rock stars of the seas, then pirate havens were their backstage lounges. These were the places where ships got patched up, crews partied away their loot, and tavern owners got rich off an endless stream of rum-soaked sailors. To empires, these towns were dens of criminals. To pirates, they were home sweet home. Let's drop anchor at a few of the most famous ones. Tortuga, the original pirate hangout. First stop, Tortuga, a small island off the coast of Hispaniola. In the 1600s, it was basically a pirate startup hub. Originally settled by French hunters, it quickly became a magnet for buccaneers and outlaws. Tortuga was rough around the edges, think more muddy streets than palm-lined paradise, but it had everything a pirate needed: rum, women, weapons, and a safe harbor. The French governors here often looked the other way, especially if pirates helped fend off the Spanish. Tortuga also had a reputation for being lawless. Crews from England, France, and the Netherlands all rubbed shoulders here. It was a melting pot of languages, cultures, and questionable hygiene. But for pirates, it was freedom. If you sailed into Tortuga with loot, you could spend it on whatever your heart or liver desired. Port Royal, the wickedest city on earth. If Tortuga was the scrappy older cousin, Port Royal, Jamaica was the full-blown Vegas of the Caribbean. After the English took Jamaica from Spain in 1655, Port Royal exploded as a trading hub, and where there's trade, there's piracy. Port Royal was famous for excess. At its peak, it had one of the highest concentrations of taverns, gambling dens, and brothels anywhere in the world. Some estimates say it had one drinking house for every 10 residents. Pirates would roll in with stolen gold and blow it all in a week on rum, gambling, or lavish parties. It was also a market for stolen goods. Want a silver goblet borrowed from a Spanish galleon? Check. Exotic fabrics? Check. A pistol that might still have someone else's initials carved into it? Double check. Port Royal got so notorious that moralists back in England called it the wickedest city on earth. And in 1692, disaster struck. A massive earthquake hit Jamaica, and much of Port Royal literally sank into the sea. Some people at the time said it was divine punishment for the town's sins. Pirates probably just said, "Guess we'll find a new bar." Nassau, the pirate republic. By the early 1700s, Nassau in the Bahamas had taken the crown as the ultimate pirate haven. What made Nassau different was that it wasn't just a hangout, it became a pirate republic. After a war left the Bahamas mostly abandoned by colonial officials, pirates moved in and took over. Nassau's harbor was perfect for pirate ships, and soon it was swarming with them. At one point, it's said that hundreds of pirates called Nassau home, including some of the most famous names like Charles Vane, Calico Jack, and Blackbeard. Here, pirates created their own rules. Crews voted on leaders, shared loot, and treated Nassau as their headquarters. Governors in Europe were horrified. To them, Nassau was proof that piracy wasn't just random crime, it was organized rebellion. The British eventually sent in forces to crush the pirate republic, but for a few glorious years, Nassau was the closest thing pirates ever had to a capital city. Lesser havens and hideouts. It wasn't just the big names, though. Pirates also used smaller islands, coves, and ports all across the Caribbean. Places like New Providence, St. Kitts, and even remote spots like Madagascar in the Indian Ocean became pirate-friendly. The beauty of these havens was their unpredictability. You never knew which quiet bay might suddenly be hiding a sloop full of pirates waiting for a fat merchant ship to sail by. Life in a pirate haven. So what was it actually like to walk through one of these towns? Imagine noise, chaos, and the smell of rum. Taverns overflowing with drunken sailors singing sea shanties. Gambling tables where fortunes vanished overnight. Merchants hawking stolen goods on street corners. And probably a few sword fights breaking out in alleys. These havens were wild, dangerous, and alive. They were also crucial to the pirate lifestyle. Without them, ships couldn't be repaired, loot couldn't be spent, and crews would have nowhere to recruit new members. Wrapping it up, pirate havens were more than just hangouts. They were the backbone of the Golden Age. Tortuga gave the buccaneers their start. Port Royal showed how pirates could reshape an economy. And Nassau proved that pirates could even build their own community, at least until the empires came knocking. In the next chapter, we'll climb aboard a pirate ship and take a look at something pretty surprising: pirate democracy. Because while kings ruled on land, pirates had their own way of running things, and honestly, it was way more fair. Pirate democracy and the code. When most people think of pirates, they imagine chaos, rum everywhere, people yelling air, and captains bossing their crew around like little sea kings. But here is the twist: pirates were actually way more democratic than the kingdoms and empires chasing them. If you joined a pirate crew, you got more of a voice than you'd ever have back on land. Weird, right? Let's break it down. Captains weren't kings on a naval warship or a merchant vessel. The captain was basically a dictator. Orders were law. If you disobeyed, you'd get flogged, thrown in the brig, or worse. Pirates hated that system. Many of them had escaped it. So, when they made their own rules, they made sure no one man had absolute power. Pirate captains were elected by the crew. That's right, elected. And if the crew didn't like how their captain was doing the job, they could vote him out. Imagine firing your boss just because he annoyed you. That was pirate life. Captains did have power during battle. Somebody had to call the shots when cannonballs were flying. But once the fight was over, they were just another member of the crew. The quartermaster, the real MVP. If the captain was the star of the show, the quartermaster was the stage manager. He was elected too, and his job was to keep things fair. The quartermaster handed out supplies, settled disputes, and made sure the captain didn't get too full of himself. Think of the quartermaster as the union rep of the pirate ship. If you had a problem like not getting your fair share of rum, you went to him, not the captain. The pirate code. Now here is where things get even more interesting. Most pirate crews had a written set of rules, called the Articles or the Pirate Code. Every new recruit had to agree to it, often by signing or making a mark. It was basically a pirate constitution. The rules covered things like loot sharing. Everyone got a fair cut. The captain and quartermaster usually got a bit more, but nothing outrageous. Injury compensation. If you lost an arm or an eye, you got extra money. Pirates were surprisingly ahead of their time with this early version of workers' comp. No desertion. If you abandoned ship in battle, the punishment was harsh. Pirates valued loyalty, curfews and behavior. Believe it or not, some crews banned fighting on board and even set rules about when you could play dice or gamble. Were the rules always followed perfectly? Of course not. These were pirates. But the point is, they had a system, and it gave everyone a sense of fairness. Equality at sea. One of the wildest things about pirate democracy was how equal it was compared to society on land. Back in Europe, class mattered. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were enslaved, you had almost no rights. But pirate ships didn't care much about class or race. Many pirate crews were mixed, sailors from England, France, Africa, the Caribbean, even escaped enslaved people and indigenous allies. On land, these men wouldn't be seen as equals. At sea, if you pulled your weight, you got your share. It wasn't a utopia, but it was a lot more equal than most other places at the time. Why did pirates bother with democracy? Pirates didn't just do this out of kindness. They were practical. A happy crew was a loyal crew. If everyone felt fairly treated, they'd fight harder, raid more bravely, and stick together longer. Also, pirate life was dangerous. Captains who ruled like tyrants often faced mutiny. Better to keep things fair and avoid a knife in the back while you slept. A pirate ship versus a navy ship. To really see how radical this was, compare a pirate ship with a navy ship. On a navy ship, the captain got paid a fortune. The crew got crumbs. Discipline was brutal. On a pirate ship, the loot was split more evenly. The crew had a say in leadership. Rules protected the average sailor. No wonder so many men deserted the navy to join pirate crews. It wasn't just about treasure, it was about respect. Wrapping it up so, while kings and emperors ruled their empires with iron fists, pirates out on the open sea were busy holding votes, making contracts, and splitting loot fairly. The pirate world was messy, sure, but it was also one of the most democratic workplaces of its time. And in the next chapter, we'll look at how this system played out in real life by zooming in on some of the most famous pirate captains. Spoiler, not all of them were good bosses. Some became legends, and others, well, let's just say mutiny was never far away. Legendary pirate captains. Piracy gave the world some colorful characters. Some were cunning masterminds, others were pure chaos wrapped in a beard, but all of them left a mark on history. These captains weren't just criminals at sea, they became symbols of freedom, terror, and adventure. Let's meet a few of the headliners. Blackbeard, the scariest beard in history. If you know only one pirate name, it's probably Blackbeard. His real name was Edward Teach or Thatch, depending on who you ask, and he became the ultimate boogeyman of the seas. Blackbeard was a master of psychological warfare. He braided slow-burning fuses into his beard and lit them during battle, so smoke and sparks poured off his face. Imagine being a nervous sailor on a merchant ship and suddenly seeing a giant man with a flaming beard charging at you. You'd probably surrender before a single cannon fired. But here is the fun part. Blackbeard wasn't as bloodthirsty as legends say. Most of the time, his terrifying appearance was enough to scare ships into giving up without a fight. He knew fear was more efficient than endless sword fights. His flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a beast with 40 cannons. For a while, he was unstoppable. But in 1718, the British Navy caught up with him off the coast of North Carolina. After a brutal battle, Blackbeard was killed. Rumors say he took 5 gunshots and 20 sword wounds before going down. A dramatic end for a dramatic man. Calico Jack, the pirate with style. John Rackham, better known as Calico Jack, wasn't the most successful pirate, but he had flair. His nickname came from his love of bright calico clothing, and his flag to cross swords under a skull helped inspire the classic pirate Jolly Roger design. Calico Jack is remembered less for his own deeds and more for his crew. He sailed with 2 of the most famous female pirates in history, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Together, they raided ships in the Caribbean and became legendary. In the end, though, Calico Jack wasn't so lucky. In 1720, he was captured by the British while drunk and unable to fight. He was hanged in Jamaica, but his legacy lives on thanks to his crew and his iconic flag. Bartholomew Roberts, the king of pirates. If piracy had a workaholic, it was Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart. Unlike the flamboyant Blackbeard, Roberts was disciplined, almost professional, and he was ridiculously successful. Roberts captured over 400 ships in his career, more than almost any other pirate. He also had strict rules for his crew: no gambling, no women on board, and lights out by 8 p.m. Not exactly the wild party pirate you'd expect, but his discipline paid off. His ships ran like clockwork, and his reputation made him feared across the Atlantic. Roberts met his end in 1722, when the British Navy ambushed him off the coast of West Africa. He died in battle, but by then, his name had already cemented him as the most effective pirate of the age. Captain Kidd, pirate or scapegoat. Not every pirate wanted to be one. William Kidd, better known as Captain Kidd, actually started as a privateer hired to hunt pirates. But somewhere along the way, things went sideways. He captured a ship in the Indian Ocean called the Quedagh Merchant, loaded with treasure. Suddenly, the line between privateer and pirate got blurry. The British government decided Kidd had gone rogue, and he was put on trial. Kidd swore he was innocent, but it didn't matter. He was hanged in London in 1701, and his story became one of the most famous pirate trials of all time. Some say he was a scapegoat, punished to make an example. Either way, his legend grew, with tales of buried treasure that people still chase today. Charles Vane, the hot-headed rebel. If you wanted a captain who embodied chaos, look no further than Charles Vane. He was bold, ruthless, and had zero patience for authority, even pirate authority. Vane was known for refusing to back down, even when outgunned. That stubbornness made him respected by some and hated by others. At one point, his own crew voted him out and replaced him with Calico Jack. Eventually, Vane's luck ran out. After being shipwrecked, he was captured and executed in Jamaica. His fiery temper gave him a short but unforgettable career. Wrapping it up, the golden age of piracy wasn't just about ships and treasure, it was about the people who dared to defy empires. Blackbeard's theatrics, Calico Jack's style, Robert's discipline, Kidd's tragedy, and Vane's rebellion all show the different faces of piracy. In the next chapter, we'll dive into something every pirate needed to master: pirate ships and naval warfare. Because without the right ship, even the scariest beard in the world wouldn't get you very far. Pirate ships and naval warfare. When you think of pirates, you probably imagine big galleons with rows of cannons blasting away. But truth is, most pirates didn't want giant ships. They wanted something fast, sneaky, and able to zip through shallow waters like a speedboat with sails. Pirate ships were carefully chosen tools, not just floating houses. And when it came time for battle, pirates had some clever tricks up their sleeves. The pirate's favorite ride. The sloop was the pirate's dream car. Small, light, and fast. It could carry about 75 men and a handful of cannons. Sloops could dart into shallow bays where big navy ships couldn't follow. Plus, they were easy to handle and perfect for surprise attacks. Sure, they didn't pack the firepower of a 40-cannon galleon, but pirates didn't care. They weren't looking to fight full naval battles. They wanted quick smash and grabs board the merchant ship, grab the loot, and vanish before the navy even knew what happened. Brigs and brigantines for bigger crews and longer voyages. Pirates sometimes used brigs or brigantines. These were sturdier, carried more cannons, and still had decent speed. Blackbeard's infamous Queen Anne's Revenge started life as a French slave ship before he captured it and turned it into a floating fortress. The trade-off was that bigger ships needed more men and more supplies, and they were harder to hide. But if you wanted to look intimidating, nothing beat a wall of cannons pointed at your enemy. Weapons on board pirates weren't rolling in state-of-the-art gear. Their weapons were practical. Cannons, short range, but terrifying. They weren't always meant to sink ships. More often, pirates fired warning shots or aimed to damage sails and rigging so the target couldn't escape. Swivel guns, small cannons mounted on rails, great for blasting decks full of panicking sailors. Muskets and pistols. Accuracy wasn't great, but at close range, they were deadly. Pirates often carried more than one pistol tucked into their belts. Cutlasses, short, curved swords perfect for close combat, light enough to swing in tight spaces. Boarding axes, useful for climbing, chopping ropes, or cracking open doors and sometimes skulls. The art of the chase. A pirate battle usually started with a chase. Picture a merchant ship spotting a strange sail on the horizon. Panic sets in. The crew pushes their ship hard as possible, but the pirates are faster. Pirates often flew false flags, pretending to be friendly until they got close. At the last minute, they'd hoist the Jolly Roger, fire a cannon, and demand surrender. Many merchant crews gave up right there. Fighting pirates was risky. and cargo wasn't worth dying over. Boarding and fighting if the target didn't surrender. Things got loud and messy. Pirates fired grape shot, basically giant shotgun blasts to clear decks. Then came the boarding. Grappling hooks flew, ropes tightened, and pirates swarmed over the sides yelling like maniacs. Hand-to-hand combat was brutal, but usually short. Pirates wanted the loot, not endless duels. Once the merchant crew gave up, the pirates rounded them up, looted the cargo, and sometimes recruited any sailors who wanted a new life of adventure. Naval tactics. Brains over brawn pirates knew they couldn't win drawn-out wars against trained navies. Their strength was surprise and speed. They avoided heavily armed warships whenever possible. Instead, they picked off merchant vessels, stragglers, or poorly defended convoys. They also used geography. Shallow reefs, hidden coves, and narrow straits were perfect traps. Pirates knew the waters better than the big navy captains, and that knowledge often saved their lives. The psychological game. Remember Blackbeard with his flaming beard? That wasn't just for laughs, it was strategy. Pirates relied heavily on fear. A terrifying flag, a sudden cannon blast, or a ship charging full of screaming men could break an enemy's will before the real fight even started. The less pirates had to fight, the fewer men they lost. And dead men don't spend treasure. Wrapping it up, pirate ships weren't giant floating castles, they were tools of speed, surprise, and terror. From nimble sloops to massive stolen flagships, every vessel was chosen for one reason: to outsmart and outrun the enemy. And when the time came, pirates were masters of turning the sea into their battlefield. Next time, we'll look at the other side of the coin. The life of the ordinary pirate crewman. Because swashbuckling battles were only a small part of the story most of the time, pirates were just sweaty guys stuck on a crowded wooden boat. Life aboard a pirate ship. When you picture pirates, you probably imagine constant adventure, sword fights, buried treasure, and endless barrels of rum. But honestly, most pirate life was just life. Long days at sea, cramped sleeping quarters, questionable food, and a lot of waiting around for the next target. Let's take a tour of what it was like to actually live aboard a pirate ship. Cramped quarters. First thing, space was tight. A pirate ship wasn't a luxury cruise. Hammocks were strung up wherever there was room, usually crammed together, so close you could smell your neighbor's armpit all night. Privacy didn't exist. During the day, the deck was busy with chores, repairing sails, scrubbing planks, patching leaks, and making sure the cannons didn't rust. Pirates might have been criminals, but they still had to keep their ships in working order or risk sinking in the middle of nowhere. Pirate food, not a feast if you thought the food was bad in medieval castles. Pirate grub was even worse. Most meals were salted meat or dried biscuits called hardtack. Hardtack was so tough you could break a tooth on it, and it often came with a bonus of worms or weevils. Pirates just tapped the bugs out and ate it anyway. When lucky, they caught fresh fish or raided coastal villages for supplies. And of course, there was rum. Lots and lots of rum. It wasn't just for fun, it was safer than the often dirty water stored in barrels. The daily grind life at sea meant routine. Crews worked in shifts, keeping watch, trimming sails, and steering. When no target was in sight, boredom set in. Pirates passed the time playing dice, singing songs, or telling tall tales about buried treasure, most of which were probably made up on the spot. But boredom could turn dangerous. Arguments over loot, cheating at dice, or just plain bad tempers sometimes led to fights. That's where the pirate code came in handy, setting rules for behavior on board. Health and hygiene, or lack thereof. Let's be real. Pirate ships were not clean places. Bathing was rare, clothes went unwashed, and rats were regular passengers. Disease spread easily, from scurvy thanks to a lack of vitamin C, to fevers and infections. If you got injured, the ship's doctor might have been just a carpenter with a saw. Amputations were common, and anesthesia was a bottle of rum. Not exactly modern medicine. Sharing the loot. The good news. When plunder finally came in, the crew got a fair share. That made pirate life way more appealing than being stuck in a navy or merchant ship, where captains hogged the profits. A pirate could go from broke to rich overnight, though many blew their entire fortune at the next port. Entertainment and morale: pirates weren't all doom and gloom. Music was huge. Fiddles, drums, and sea shanties kept spirits up. Some ships even had musicians as part of the crew. Storytelling was another big pastime, with sailors bragging about past raids or whispering legends of hidden treasure. And yes, drinking was constant. Rum was mixed with water, sugar, or citrus to make grog, which made the daily grind a little easier to swallow. Punishments on board for all their freedom. Pirate ships still had discipline. Break the code and you could be whipped, marooned on a deserted island, or worse, the harshest punishment, being keel-hauled, dragged under the ship's hull. It was rare, but the threat alone kept most pirates in line. Camaraderie at sea: despite the filth, the bad food, and the danger, pirate crews often felt like family. Everyone relied on each other to survive. Loot was shared, leadership was elected, and even injured pirates were looked after. That sense of brotherhood, and sometimes sisterhood, was what made piracy appealing compared to the rigid, cruel life on Navy ships. Wrapping it up: living on a pirate ship wasn't glamorous. It was smelly, risky, and often boring, but compared to the alternatives, it offered freedom, fairness, and adventure. For many sailors of the 17th and 18th centuries, that was more than enough. Next up, well, look at the other big part of pirate life. What happened once they stepped ashore? In Chapter 11, we'll talk about pirate treasure, trade, and the booming black markets that kept the whole system afloat. Treasure, trade, and the pirate economy. When people think about pirates, they usually picture mountains of gold coins, glittering jewels, and chests buried under palm trees with a big X marking the spot. The truth: real pirate treasure wasn't always so glamorous. Most of the time, it looked a lot more like barrels of sugar, sacks of flour, or a few crates of rum. But however it came, loot was the lifeblood of piracy, and it created its own strange little economy. The myth of buried treasure starts with the classic image: pirates digging holes on beaches and burying treasure maps for future generations. Sorry to burst the bubble, but that basically never happened. Pirates weren't patient investors. They wanted to spend their loot as fast as they got it. The few times treasure was buried, it was usually out of desperation. Captain Kidd supposedly buried some loot on Long Island when he feared getting caught. But that was rare. For the average pirate, gold didn't last long. It turned into booze, gambling, and parties at the next port. What pirates actually stole? So if not chests of gold, what were pirates after? Pretty much anything valuable. Coins, Spanish silver pieces of 8, were the most common currency in the New World. Easy to trade and widely accepted. Goods, sugar, tobacco, indigo, spices, and cocoa were incredibly valuable. Pirates loved targeting cargo ships loaded with these everyday luxuries: weapons and supplies, cannons, muskets, sails, or food. Sometimes these were worth more than gold because they kept the ship running. People: pirates sometimes took hostages for ransom or new crew members if they were short-handed. So yeah, pirate loot was less about giant pearls and more about barrels of molasses. Splitting the loot once plunder was secured. It was time for the best part: dividing it up. Unlike most navies, pirate crews split loot fairly. The captain and quartermaster might get a bigger share, but every man and sometimes woman got something. Injured pirates often got extra compensation. Lose an arm, you might get a bonus payout. It wasn't charity, it was practical. The crew wanted to make sure people stayed loyal even as they were hurt. Spending sprees on shore: as soon as a pirate crew reached a safe haven, the real party began. Gold and silver flowed into taverns, brothels, and gambling houses. Some pirates blew through months of fortune in just a week. It wasn't unusual for a man to end up broke again before the ship even set sail. Merchants, of course, loved this. Pirate money fueled local economies in places like Nassau, Tortuga, and Port Royal. Even officials who were supposed to stop piracy often turned a blind eye because the spending boom was too good to resist. The black market pirates didn't just spend money, they also sold stolen goods through black markets. Colonists hungry for cheap sugar or tobacco often didn't care where it came from, as long as the price was low. This shadow economy tied pirates into everyday life. A candlestick in a wealthy merchant's house or a bolt of cloth at the market might started its journey on a Spanish treasure ship. Piracy was woven into the fabric of Caribbean trade. Pirate banking. Believe it or not, some pirates actually save money. A few invested in property or stashed coins with trusted contacts, but for most, the future wasn't guaranteed. Life expectancy for pirates was short, and tomorrow's raid might be their last. Why save when you could drink, gamble, and live big today? Wrapping it up, pirate treasure wasn't just about shiny gold, it was an entire underground economy. From stolen barrels of sugar to coins passed around taverns, pirate loot kept the wheels turning in the Caribbean. And while buried treasure maps make great stories, the real story is how pirates lived for the moment, spending their plunder faster than they stole it. Next time, we'll pull back from the money talk and look at the myths, legends, and symbols that turned real pirates into the larger-than-life characters we know today. Spoiler: pirates, peg legs, and weren't always part of the deal. Pirate myths, legends, and symbols. Pirates didn't just steal treasure, they stole the world's imagination. Over the centuries, they've been turned into larger-than-life characters, complete with parrots on their shoulders, wooden legs, and cries of matey. But how much of that is true? Let's dig into the myths, legends, and symbols that made pirates pop culture icons. The Jolly Roger. Nothing says pirate quite like the black flag, with a skull and crossbones. But here is the fun part. There wasn't just one Jolly Roger. Different captains had their own designs. Some flags had skeletons holding hourglasses, others showed bleeding hearts or swords. The message was always the same: surrender now or face a bloody death. It was psychological warfare at its finest. The name Jolly Roger itself is a mystery. Some say it came from the French Joli Rouge, pretty red, referring to the blood-red flags some pirates flew. Either way, the sight of one flapping on the horizon was enough to make sailors' stomachs drop. Matey. Bad news for pirate movie fans. Real pirates probably didn't run around jailing air. That accent comes from 20th century movies, especially the 1950 Disney film Treasure Island, where actor Robert Newton played Long John Silver with a heavy West Country English accent. Before that, pirates likely spoke in a mix of accents: English, Irish, French, Dutch, African, Caribbean, you name it. The sea was a melting pot, so the classic is more Hollywood than history. Parrots, peg legs, and eye patches. Okay, what about the classic pirate look? Parrots, wooden legs, and eye patches. Parrots, believe it or not, this one has some truth. Exotic birds were traded in the Caribbean, and pirates sometimes kept them as pets or souvenirs. But not every pirate walked around with a parrot on his shoulder. Peg legs, also partly true. Life at sea was dangerous, and amputations were common. Some sailors did end up with wooden legs, but again, it wasn't standard issue. Eye patches. Here is a fun theory. Some sailors may have worn eye patches, not because they lost an eye, but to keep one eye adjusted to darkness. That way, they could fight above deck in sunlight, and then dash below deck ready to see in the dark. Smart, if a bit impractical. Buried treasure maps. We've already talked about this, but it's worth repeating. The idea of pirates burying treasure and drawing maps is mostly fiction. Robert Louis Stevenson's novel Treasure Island made it popular in the 1880s, long after the golden age of piracy had ended. Real pirates were more likely to spend their loot than hide it. Ghost stories and curses. Pirates loved a good spooky tale. Sailors were famously superstitious, believing in cursed ships, haunted waters, and bad omens like black cats or whistling on deck. Some legends even claimed the ghosts of pirates still haunted their old stomping grounds. Stories of ghostly ships, like the Flying Dutchman, mixed with pirate lore to give the seas an eerie reputation. If you were out on a dark night and saw strange lights on the horizon, your imagination might run wild. Pop culture pirates are a huge part of why we picture pirates. The way we do comes from books, plays, and movies. Treasure Island gave us Long John Silver. Peter Pan gave us Captain Hook. And Pirates of the Caribbean turned Jack Sparrow into the modern face of piracy. These stories blended bits of history with buckets of imagination. And honestly, that's part of the fun. Pirates became legends because people wanted them to be larger-than-life rebels, not just thieves with scurvy. Wrapping it up, the truth about pirates is messy and gritty, but the myths turn them into icons. The Jolly Roger, the air, accent, the peg leg, and the parrot, they're all part real, part fantasy. But together, they created the pirate image that survived for centuries. In the next chapter, we'll flip the coin and look at the darker side. How governments and empires cracked down on piracy. Because while pirates lived wild and free, the noose was always waiting. The crackdown on piracy. By the early 1700s, the seas were crawling with pirates. Merchant captains were terrified. European empires were losing fortunes, and colonial governors were getting headaches from all the lawlessness. At first, piracy was almost tolerated, sometimes even encouraged. But eventually, the party had to end. The golden age of piracy didn't fade away quietly. It was hunted down, ship by ship, until the last Jolly Roger was torn down. Why governments turned against pirates? At the start, pirates were useful. England, France, and Spain were constantly at war, and having privateers, government-approved pirates, raid enemy ships, saved money. But once peace treaties were signed, those same privateers became a nuisance. Trade was booming. Sugar, tobacco, and silver were worth mountains of money. Pirates were bleeding the system dry. Merchants complained, investors pressured governments, and kings realized they were losing more money than pirates were worth. That's when the gloves came off. The Royal Navy steps in. The biggest game changer was the rise of powerful navies. The British Royal Navy, in particular, began sending warships into the Caribbean, the American colonies, and even the coast of Africa to patrol and hunt pirates. Pirates, who relied on small, fast ships, could often outrun heavy warships. But once caught in a battle, the odds were grim. Cannons from a naval frigate could shred a pirate sloop in minutes. Governors cracked down. Colonial governors were under pressure too. Places like Nassau in the Bahamas had basically turned into pirate capitals. Merchants called it a nest of rogues. The British eventually sent Governor Woodes Rogers to Nassau in 1718 with one mission: clean house. Rogers offered pardons to pirates who surrendered peacefully. Hundreds took the deal, but for those who refused, the noose awaited. Nassau went from pirate paradise to Royal Navy stronghold almost overnight. The pirate's choice: pardon or gallows. The government strategy was simple: offer mercy first, then terror. Pirates were given the option to accept a pardon and go straight or face execution if caught later. Many accepted, hoping to live quietly. But plenty couldn't resist slipping back into piracy. For them, the punishment was brutal and very public. Pirates were hanged in major ports, their bodies sometimes tarred and hung in chains as a warning to others. Nothing kills the vibe like your crewmate dangling by the docks. Famous final showdowns. Some of the most famous pirate legends ended during this crackdown. Blackbeard 1718, killed in a bloody battle off North Carolina when the Royal Navy cornered him. It took multiple gunshots and sword wounds to bring him down. His head was hung from a ship's bowsprit as proof. Charles Vane 1721, once feared for his cruelty. Vane was caught, tried, and hanged in Jamaica. Black Bart Roberts 1722, one of the most successful pirates ever. Roberts was killed in battle off the coast of Africa. His death is often marked as the symbolic end of the Golden Age, the end of pirate havens. Taverns, markets, and safe harbors that once welcomed pirates quickly turned hostile. Colonial leaders realized they couldn't risk being accused of supporting piracy. The same merchants who once traded happily with pirates now called the Navy, if a suspicious ship appeared. The outlaw lifestyle got lonelier. Without friendly ports, pirates had fewer places to repair ships, sell loot, or party away their earnings. The age of the gallows, by the 1720s and 1730s, the crackdown was nearly complete. The gallows became a symbol of the new order. Ports like London, Port Royal, and Boston staged hangings with huge crowds, turning pirate executions into grim public theatre. The message was clear. Piracy wasn't a romantic adventure anymore. It was a death sentence waiting to happen. Wrapping it up, the crackdown didn't end piracy completely after all. Smuggling and sea banditry never fully go away. But the wild, open era of pirate republics and legendary captains was finished. The golden age had been strangled by pardons, patrols, and plenty of hangings. But while the noose killed the pirates, it didn't kill their legend. In the next chapter, we'll look at what pirates left behind, the legacy that still shapes our stories, movies, and even ideas about freedom today. The legacy of piracy. Pirates may have been hunted down, hanged, and erased from the seas, but their spirit never really died. In fact, their legend has only grown stronger over time. From ideas of freedom and democracy to the way we tell adventure stories, piracy left fingerprints all over culture and history. So, what exactly did the golden age of piracy leave behind? Pirate democracy, one of the most surprising legacies, is how pirates ran their ships. They didn't have kings or nobles bossing them around. Instead, most pirate crews voted for their captains, agreed on ship rules, and split loot fairly. Now, let's be clear, pirates weren't planning the American Revolution. They weren't writing constitutions. But the idea that common men and sometimes women could vote, make rules, and share wealth fairly, that was radical at the time. Some historians even call pirate ships floating republics. The rebel image pirates became symbols of rebellion against authority. They didn't bow to kings or empires. They carved their own path, lived by their own code, and gave a big middle finger, well, probably more like a cutlass, to the powers of their day. That rebel image stuck. From outlaw cowboys to rock stars, the pirate spirit shows up anywhere people want to imagine a life outside the rules. Literature and storytelling, the golden age of piracy, have ended in the 1700s, but the 1800s turned pirates into storybook legends. Writers like Robert Louis Stevenson gave us Treasure Island, complete with Long John Silver and buried treasure maps. Suddenly, pirates weren't just criminals, they were adventure heroes. These stories shaped the way we think of pirates today, mysterious, dangerous, but also oddly charming. Without them, Captain Jack Sparrow probably wouldn't exist. Symbols that lasted. Some pirate symbols never went away. The Jolly Roger, for example, still pops up everywhere, from Halloween costumes to sports mascots. It's a universal sign of rebellion and danger, even if it once just meant surrender or die. Even phrases like "dead men tell no tales" have outlived the men who said them. Pirates might be long gone, but their words and symbols float on. Pirates in pop culture, movies, plays, and comics took pirate myths and ran with them. Captain Hook in Peter Pan, Errol Flynn in old swashbuckler films, and of course, Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. Every generation reimagines pirates in their own way. Sometimes they're brutal villains, other times they're lovable rogues. Either way, they never go out of style. Influence on the Caribbean. Piracy also left a mark on the Caribbean itself. Pirate havens like Nassau and Port Royal became part of the region's identity. Even today, tourism in these areas leans heavily on pirate history. Ghost tour, pirate museums, themed festivals. You can thank Blackbeard and friends for a booming industry centuries later. Freedom. But at a cost. It's tempting to see pirates as pure freedom fighters. But let's not forget, they were still criminals. They robbed, killed, and sometimes enslaved people. The pirate dream of freedom came with bloodshed and fear. That messy truth is part of their legacy too. A reminder that rebellion can be inspiring, but it can also be violent. Why pirates still matter. So why are we still talking about pirates 300 years later? Maybe it's because they represent something we all secretly want: a life without bosses, taxes, or rules. A life of adventure, danger, and freedom. Of course, most of us wouldn't survive a week at sea, but imagining it, that's where the magic is. Pirates give us a taste of rebellion without the hangings. Wrapping it up, the golden age of piracy ended with gallows and gunfire, but its legend sailed on. Pirates left us ideas about freedom, unforgettable symbols, and some of the most enduring stories ever told. In our final chapter, we'll tie everything together, looking back at the rise, the world peak, and the fall of the golden age of piracy. One last voyage before we let the anchor drop for good. The lasting legend of the golden age of piracy. So here we are, at the end of the golden age of piracy. We've travelled from its stormy beginnings to its bloody downfall, with plenty of rum, treasure, and sea shanties in between. But before we dock for good, let's step back and look at the whole journey. What made this era so unforgettable? And why does it still echo across centuries? The rise, the golden age, didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of a world in chaos, empires fighting, trade routes overflowing with riches, and sailors tired of being underpaid and mistreated. Out of that storm stepped the pirate, not just a thief at sea, but a symbol of rebellion against a system stacked against ordinary men. The peak at their height, pirates ruled whole corners of the seas. Nassau, Tortuga, and Port Royal were buzzing with life. Ships flying the Jolly Roger spread fear across oceans. Famous captains Blackbeard and Bonnie, Calico Jack, Black Bart Roberts turned into legends even while they lived. They built their own little worlds with pirate codes, elections, and a kind of rough democracy. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like they had cracked the code for freedom at sea. The fall, but empires don't tolerate rebellion forever. Once piracy cut too deep into profits, the full weight of the law came crashing down. Pardons were offered, warships hunted the seas, and gallows loomed in every port. One by one, the great pirates were killed, captured, or retired. Blackbeard's head swung from a bowsprit, Black Bart Roberts fell in battle, and Nassau turned from pirate haven to naval fortress. The dream of pirate republics was buried under the noose. What they left behind, yet somehow, even in defeat, pirates won. Their bodies were hanged, but their image refused to die. The world couldn't stop talking about them. Writers spun tales of buried treasure, flags, and ghost ships. Later, Hollywood gave us sword fights, parrots, and unforgettable characters like Captain Jack Sparrow. The real pirates might have been messy, violent, and short-lived, but the legend, that lived on. And in that legend, pirates became something more than criminals. They became symbols of freedom, rebellion, and living life by your own rules. Why we still dream of pirates? Maybe that's why pirates still capture us. Deep down, most people dream of escaping the grind, ditching bosses, bills, and boring routines to chase freedom on the open sea. Pirates did that, even if only for a while. Sure, their freedom came with danger, hunger, and a high chance of dying young. But in a way, that's what makes the legend so powerful. They lived boldly, without waiting for tomorrow. The last word, the golden age of piracy, only lasted a few decades, but its shadow is centuries long. It left us stories, symbols, and a spirit that refuses to sink. Whenever someone raises a Jolly Roger, tells a ghostly sea tale, or just dreams about running away to adventure, they're keeping that spirit alive. So, was piracy glamorous? Not really. Was it brutal, dangerous, and short-lived? Absolutely. But was it unforgettable? Without a doubt. The pirates may be gone, but the legend sails on forever.